Hi, everyone. This is Ellen from the Astrology Journal. I want to talk about an idea I've been having about how astrology, the astrology chart, might be able to help us in terms of helping us grow developmentally, helping us understand our developmental path and where we might need help and support, what maybe we didn't get fulfilled and how can we address that and all of that. I'm just at the very beginning of exploring this. I don't have answers. I'm not big on prescription. So that's not the intention of this. It's not the intention of make astrology into if this signature is this, then do this. That's not what this is about. It's really about just how can we better be in relationship with astrology and the signs and the planets and all that from a developmental perspective, a human developmental perspective. I think sometimes in the spiritual world, we forget this, that we are human beings and that we are here, that we have certain developmental steps and things like that we have to grow and evolve through if we're going to become the fullest potential of our humanness as we can. And so, I want to. So this is really important to me. I guess I want to give a little bit of backdrop. So when I started kind of studying or looking into or felt gravitated to astrology, or a gravitational pull to astrology, it was a lot of it was about personality based and also kind of psychological and personality based astrology based. And the psychology was mostly Jungian psychology, and I think all of that's wonderful and good, but neither of those happened to be my forte really, and so I felt frustrated, and I felt like in some ways, even with psychological astrology, even Jungian, I felt like in some ways it was missing something. Personality based astrology to me doesn't go deep enough, and Jungian, I'm not sure what it is. It never quite resonated with me, that's just a personal preference and resonance. It's not a statement about either of those things. It's just, personality based astrology, I do think is more surface. I will say that. The other thing about astrology at the time is it was more about good and bad. It had evolved to in like old astrology, traditional astrology. It was like, this is a really bad thing. If you have this in your chart, you're doomed. And if you have this in your chart, you're fortunate and everything's going to go great. Modern astrology kind of started to understand that it's not really like that. It depends. Even really good things can actually manifest in negative ways. So it was adapted to be more like, so this is the positive side of the sign, and this is the negative side of the sign, and I think that's a really important thing. But what continued to be, and then I had studied evolutionary astrology, which was really the version taught by Jeff Green, which is all about a focus on the soul in a very specific way. And it's looking at the journey of the soul from the past life, you could say, of the soul through now to the trajectory of the soul. Where is the soul wanting to head to? And that gives a lot of context for some of the experiences we might be feeling or having, or, it was helpful for me to give a broader, deeper context. But I still felt like there was something missing. Like how can we, the mirror back is helpful. So that kind of context can act as a mirror back, and that's super helpful. But I'm a human being in human form, and I'm here to grow through the human experience, which includes developmental steps in the human experience. To be able to grow and evolve as a human, as a spirit in human form, I go through specific human developmental steps. So how can I use astrology to help me understand that? And so that's kind of where I'm at. And I think in a way, this is kind of a deep response or reaction to a general spiritual bias that has been present for a lot of our human history, at least the last couple millennia or whatever, that the body is bad. And the fact that we're in these human forms, it's proof that we're bad. And so a lot of the spiritual practices were designed to help us, absolve our sins or mitigate ourselves, mitigate our experiences from things we might have done before, or, how can we escape this experience or whatever. It felt like that was a lot of what was going on in the spiritual realm. And so how can we And the other part of the spiritual kind of realm that I found problematic, because I'm just not wired this way, is that whole teacher-student model. And I'm just not wired that way. I'm wired, we're all equals, and so how can we one another share one another's experiences? I do very much appreciate people who have mastered whatever it is, that they've set their mind to. But that doesn't mean I want them to come in and tell me what to do. I appreciate their experience and their insights and their wisdom. But I feel like a lot of times it kind of crosses over that line to a little bit of an ownership, or a lot of an ownership. And that's where I don't get on board with that. So what matters to me is that, we all kind of, how can we help one another enter more deeply into our own experiences? And so that's, and to me, that brings us to our shared human experience, and that through the developmental stages. So that's kind of the big backdrop. Another part of the astrological side of it, another part of this has to do with my experience in the world of sports and fitness. So I was an athlete when I was a kid, and I was a good athlete at a local level. I succeeded. It kind of carried me through. And then at one point, it got to a point where my natural talent didn't carry me the way that it used to. And I didn't understand that talent is a starting point. It's not an ending point. Talent gives us a path to travel. And it's up to us to decide to say yes to that path and kind of consciously enter into it and learn the skills and the nuances and the practices of it and all of that. And I didn't understand that. I thought you either had it or you didn't. So I never realized my potential. And after I got sick when I was 35. After I got sick, I really wanted to figure that out, because it was a real, it was there was an underlying kind of grief around that, and a sense of failure around that. And so I really wanted to dive into it and understand, what was I missing? And so I explored. Because of my health issues, I couldn't really dive into it in terms of doing a lot of physical activity, but I could learn and I could experiment at the level I was at. And so one of the teachers actually that I came across, the fitness instructors that I came across, in terms of they write books and have DVDs and that sort of thing, was Scott Sonnen's work of RMAX International. And he has a really deep understanding of fitness. And I really appreciated a lot of kind of his insights and what he teaches. And one of the things he talks about, one of the many things he talks about, that has stuck with me, is this idea of when you're doing something, when you're challenging yourself, if you feel like you need to stop, rather than stopping, scale back to the previous level. And one of the really intelligent things about all of his fitness programs is they're designed with steps in mind. So you do this step, and then you advance to this step, and you advance to this step. So when you get to a certain step and you're challenging yourself, because that step is naturally new and the next level, then you know where you can step back to, because you've done that work. And this is a part that's really, I think, is a stumbling block for a lot of athletes, particularly like the weekend warriors and that sort of thing. Is they, or just the casual athletes or whatever, they have their thing and they really like it, but then their body gets injured and they don't know what to do. I mean, and so they lose their motivation or their interest. That was certainly the case. That was certainly the case with me. You end up just getting frustrated, and rather than recognizing that injury, assuming it wasn't like because of a specific insult to the body, more than likely that injury came about because of chronic movement, poor movement patterns in relationship to how your specific body is designed to work. And so, so people get injured and then they don't know what to do next. But what to do next is to understand what happened, why did my body fail, and what can I do to intervene there, and what can I do to help that. And so we can translate that or transfer that kind of insight to human development and say, we're living our lives and we get to a point in our life is not as we thought it would be. Well, developmentally, what might be missing? Why have we reached this point and it's not as we expected, and it's not, how can we use that experience to help us better understand ourselves and what we maybe have not been able to develop? Maybe there's, for whatever reasons, and maybe that brings up, we might experience a lot of emotions around that, and maybe that we would need to process and all of that. But there's something that we needed, you could argue, that we didn't get, because if we got it, we would be in a different place. That seems to me pretty axiomatic. Um, and I'm talking as somebody who was pretty unconscious for a lot of my life. And so my life went really off the rails, really off track. And so how can we use astrology to help us there? So I'm looking at an astrology chart. I'm recording this as a video, and I am uploading it as a podcast. But I'm going to be talking about the astrology chart. So if you want to actually see that, then you might want to watch the video. I'm looking at one of the phase charts that I work with, and I just happen to have the Libra solar eclipse chart up. It's the October 14th solar eclipse. It's not, what I'm going to talk about isn't specific to that chart. I'm really just going to be talking about the chart template and how we can start thinking about that to help us work with the chart in a way that helps us zero in or hone into our own experience and be able to start connecting with ourselves there, so that can transform. We can start to better understand what are the things we need to help us build this specific foundation. And I don't know how to explain it better than that, but maybe as I go forward and talk about this, it will start to make sense. So I started to think about this with respect to the signs of Taurus, Taurus, and actually in particular. So I saw a video of Tony Rinaudo, Rinaudo. He's in forest management, and he went to Africa, and he wanted to understand how to help regenerate forests in desert climates. And he got really frustrated at one point, and then all of a sudden he had this insight. When he was about to give up, he had this insight. He looked out at the desert, and he saw all of this, these shrubs that he always thought were shrubs, but they weren't shrubs. It turns out when he looked closer, he realized they were trees. And all of a sudden he realized the issue with forest management in the deserts isn't a lack of trees. You don't have to plant trees. The issue is the trees that are there can't grow beyond a certain point. And so why is that, and what can we do? And he realized two things: that one, the growth that is there needs protection. So people would come in and they would graze, their cattle or whatever it is they're grazing. And that's a fine practice, except that those trees at that level couldn't tolerate that. They couldn't survive through that. So they needed to they needed to be able to grow beyond to an adult place, a more mature place where they could withstand that. They could be part of the life cycle that gives forward, and beings can, other creatures can come and feed off that, and that doesn't destroy them. The other piece that he realized was that in the desert, these shrubs had lots of different branches on them. And he realized that there wasn't enough energy to sustain growth to all of those branches. So he established a pruning process that would cut back the trees to only, like, I don't know, I think it was like 3 to 5 branches or something like that. And that allowed the energy to go right into those, and there was enough, and those trees could then grow very rapidly. So you protect the trees from the grazing, and you prune them, and suddenly they're able to grow very quickly, and they can reach that maturity level in a relatively quick time. And then that's all it took, really, for the forest to be able to start regenerating itself. They're still desert forests, but they're forests. The trees are there. They offer shade, etc. They offer food for different creatures and all that kind of stuff. That offers a lot. So I started to think about that. That felt like Taurus to me. That the idea of narrowing down, and in evolutionary astrology, they talk about Taurus as being the frog in the well. So whereas Aries, you need a lot of freedom to explore, to sort of just naturally go where your instincts tell you, so that you can get feedback, so you can start to understand who you are. You know who you are inside, but it's not defined yet in terms of the world outside you. And so you need maximum freedom to be able to do that. In Taurus, it's the frog in the well. And I always heard that. It may not have been said this way, but I always heard that as kind of a negative. But actually, that's an essential part of the process. You need to narrow down, because now you need to be able to establish roots, and you need to be able to establish like a trunk and solidity in the world, so that you can grow and be able to be a part of the larger life cycle without it harming you. So Taurus, so I started to think about this developmentally. If you think about the rapid growth and the need for support and protection, that to me felt like the young child who's rapidly growing. They're growing both in terms of their physical body, but also in terms of their mental, their brain, and in terms of their sense of connection, and expanding their kind of relational horizons and all that kind of stuff. They're growing rapidly, but they need a lot of support. And I suspect, I don't have children, so don't quote me on this, and don't assume I'm right about this, but it seems to me that they also need help figuring out starting to really refine who am I. So reflecting back and being there as they process through that and figure that out. And so that was my first insight into astrology. Maybe we can think about that as kind of like developmental steps. And then after, I feel like there's something I'm missing there, but maybe it'll come to me and make more, and that'll help make more sense. But hopefully what I said is enough. So then what comes after Taurus? Well, it's Gemini. So then I started thinking about that. And it's like, well, Gemini is about curiosity, and it's about thinking, and it's about interaction, making lots of connections, and really interested in lots of different perspectives. And one of the things they teach in evolutionary astrology is that one of the things that can go wrong in Gemini is it can get overwhelmed. It can take in so much information that it loses all perspective, and it just overwhelms itself. Well, then the question becomes, so then we can start to ask, why does that happen? And if we think of the astrology wheel as steps, we can then look back to Taurus as one place. This is, things are really complex. So this is just a very simplified idea. But we can look back to Taurus and be like, well, do I know who, and we can even look back to Aries. Aries is, who am I? So do I know who I am? And then Taurus is, have I narrowed that down? I've figured out the specific areas of focus. Do I know what my gifts and talents are? And then if those two things are set, then when we enter into Gemini, we have this solid trunk. That's the I am. And then we can then branch. We can then grow lots of branches from that trunk, and we can start taking in lots of different perspectives, but we're not going to be overwhelmed because we have that trunk, that clear trunk where it's all coming from. If either Aries or Taurus say we didn't get those needs met, then maybe we're compensating in Gemini. We're trying to meet those two needs by gathering as much information as we can without having solidified, that's more solidified sense of identity and all of that. I don't know if it's making sense. I'm not big on. I'm big on systems in the sense that they, to the extent that they help. I'm not big on systems as this is the way and therefore this, do this. I think every system is meant to be adapted to the individual. So I'm just really presenting an idea, and I'm not meaning it for it to be a teaching or like this is how it is. It's just an idea as food for thought for things to, consider and play around with if it resonates with you, if it's helpful for you when you're thinking about signs, when you're thinking about astrology. But this is what I'm working with and working towards. So if we look at the chart, we can think of, so this is where I'm actually looking at the chart. Oh, and I actually wanted to go one more. So if we go to Cancer, there was something that came up, the idea of emotions trump reason. So emotions are Cancer, Gemini, the sign before Cancer. is reason. So, and if we just say that very kind of blanket statement, emotions trump reason. Well, maybe that's the only when our reason is not directed in a way where it's kind of all over the place. So maybe that's because, so why is that? Why is emotion trumping reason? Is that because we haven't learned how to process emotions, and maybe we haven't learned how to process emotions because our mind is all over the place? But why is our mind all over the place? Maybe that's because we didn't get to ground, Taurus, and maybe that's because we didn't get to have that freedom to get ideas about who we are that we could then bring in as like kindling into Taurus, to start being like, okay, is this me? Is this me? Is this me? Something like that. So again, that's just another idea. And then my thought is maybe we can kind of think about that all the way through and around the wheel. And then that gives us something that we can start to play with and think about in terms of our own relationship with our own experience. And when we're just evaluating our experience, is there anything in the chart that we might be able to look at and say, oh, maybe this? And it's never going to be transformative or helpful if it's just an intellectual idea. So the idea here is, to just give a tool that maybe will help to bring about something within that one hadn't known before or been aware of before. I don't know how to really say that. And as I always say in all of these, just as a disclaimer, I'm not an expert in any of this. This is just my relationship with the chart, my relationship with my own experience. I'm passing that on. If it's helpful, meaningful, resonant, etc., great. And especially if it's practically useful, great. And if not, leave it. There's no need. There's no need to stay with it. But anyway, so now if we look at the larger chart, if we start with the phases, so there are 8 phases, and I've put those around the wheel so we can think of maybe the phases as developmental steps, as like the large developmental steps. And I haven't thought about this beyond this concept, so just sharing something. We can think of these as the large developmental steps, and then within those, the signs can be thought of as maybe sub-steps within the phases. And also that's interesting because in the fixed signs, they kind of bridge 2 phases. Not exactly sure how to think about that. But then if you look further in, each sign can be broken up into 10-degree segments. Each sign is 30 degrees. It can be broken up into 10-degree segments. And so maybe and those are called decans, D-E-C-A-N-S. Some people call it decans. I've heard it both ways, but so I'm just going to say decans. So each 10-degree segment we can think of as another sub-step of a sub-step. And so we can start to think developmentally along these lines. It's the same as what we do, it's the same as fitness, going back to the whole fitness model. What we do, so if I'm wanting to do a squat and I can't do a squat no matter what, well, what you do is you go into that movement and you start to understand where the hitches are in your own movement. And so you start to scale back and be like, okay, I can't do a squat, but what can I do? So this is the other point that I want to bring forward. The question isn't what's wrong. The question is, well, what's the question is, what's the point that needs help and support? It's not what's wrong. What's the point that needs help and support? What's the point that hasn't been able to build and develop in the way that it's meant to? And so when we can find that, we can be like, okay, now what does it need? How can I access that? How can I help that along? How can I give it, like in the case of movement, in the case of a squat, how can I give it nourishing movement, that failure point, such that it can start to do this, this movement, something like that. So these are just ideas. I hope it's making sense. I wanted to get this down because this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. I've kind of touched on it in some of the different videos or articles I've done, but I just wanted to have it all in one place. This is just a way that I'm starting to think. And it feels like if we're humans in human form, if we're spirits in human form, and the human form, both in terms of physical body and developmental kind of mind and all that, goes through developmental processes. Like that's how we grow and evolve. That's how we come to anchor in ourselves. then how can astrology help us in that? It makes sense to me. It feels like that's the bridge between, having bodies and being spirits or something like that. So I wanted to share that. I wanted to pass that along. I hope it's, helpful or useful, or at the very least gives insight into my way of thinking about things and where I'm going. So thank you for listening. I will, I will be probably talking about this more, but I'll leave it there. And again, thank you so much for listening. Take care.